In the end, it wasn't even close. Members of France's National Assembly had two choices: vote to bring down the government or abstain. Don't vote at all. Hitting 288 would mean the government collapses. In the end, they had 331 from the left and the right, a clear majority.
For the first time in more than 60 years, the country's government has been ousted.
So all of this has led to a couple of big things. One, France's Prime Minister resigned. But two, the President, Emmanuel Macron, is as defiant as ever, accusing his opponents of acting against the interests of the country and vowing to build a new government from the ground up.
Je nommerai dans les prochains jours un Premier Ministre.
Except what escalates all of this to crisis levels is that the country has to figure out how to avoid economic disaster. Because for years, France had already been driving towards a steep financial cliff. And despite reassurances from the president, the steering wheel to the car just popped off. The vote to bring down France's government takes on a whole different meaning when you understand how much trouble France's economy is in right now.
Racked up debt.
France is in huge debt.
Spiraling debt.
First, let's talk about the country's debt. 3.2 trillion euros and rising. For reference, that's more than double what EU regulations set as the debt cap for its members, 60% of GDP. And the comparison to Greece? For a brief time, France's borrowing costs actually exceeded those of Greece. And that economy has been scarred by crippling debt for years.
France is currently under a lot of pressure from the European Union because of its spending.
And this economic uncertainty translates into planning insecurity for business and for investors, and this is very bad for the economy.
To be clear, when your economy is being compared to the economy of Greece, you're in bad shape. And let's talk about GDP. Growth in France has been quite stagnant. If we look back to 5 years ago, there was the pandemic, and then there was the recovery. But ever since then, and especially in the last 2 or so years, France has consistently fallen short of the 2 to 3% growth most economists agree is where a country wants to be.
The debt is simply too high, and the deficit is too high. And in order to bring those down, bring the deficit down, France has to cut expenditure and also would need to increase taxes to some extent.
But here's the problem. In trying to solve this issue, the government made the debt problem worse.
Macron wants to spend $9.3 billion over the next 4 years to tackle poverty.
In Macron's first term, he was pushed by a sweeping protest movement to put billions of dollars of public money into people's pockets. Minimum wage went up, tax increases were pulled away. And when the pandemic hit, now we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars spent to keep people whole. For example, even though businesses collapsed, government money kept many private sector employees on payroll at 70% of their pay. This was to prevent mass unemployment, but may have had other consequences. One of them is how it can turn a business into a so-called zombie company, getting just enough government money to stay alive, but not enough to do anything but that.
So any kind of subsidies that is important in crisis in order to address liquidity issues is important. But once it's more than just liquidity, it prolongs healthy structural changes in the economy.
As one former European Prime Minister put it, we need to get off of all of these subsidies at some point, otherwise we'll have a zombie economy. And today, this artificial life support has played a big role in the layoffs we now see across a whole range of sectors. Then, a political gamble by the French president would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately make everything worse. Back in July, when Emmanuel Macron thought he could consolidate power by calling a snap.
The snap election.
The snap election.
Snap election.
He actually just shot himself in the foot.
Macron's centrist bloc came second, not enough for his gamble to have paid off.
Marine Le Pen's far-right Rassemblement National, the National Rally Party, only got stronger, winning many more seats. To keep them at bay, the left, under the new banner of the Nouveau Front Populaire, scraped together an uneasy coalition, holding the most seats but no majority. And stuck in the middle, Macron's centrists. And this is where Macron had a problem. He needed to appoint a prime minister who, in the French system, is basically in charge of everything domestic, including budgets. The president handles defense and foreign affairs. Michel Barnier was the eventual choice, tasked with somehow finding a path forward for the French economy. And his appointment, though not most people's first choice, given how fractured Parliament was, largely went through because he was seen as capable.
I don't think there was ever an issue with Barnier himself. He was quite a respected figure by many political parties. Don't forget that he was hailed for being an excellent chief negotiator for the Brexit agreement.
But that all ended when the rubber really hit the road. Budget time. Barnier's proposed budget was supposed to recoup some 60 billion euros through taxes, big taxes on big business, but also by cutting public spending on things like pensions, very precious things like pensions. The standoff over this budget would go on for weeks. Austerity cuts in France tend to be a tough pill to swallow. So Barnier went nuclear. He used an article of the Constitution to force through a piece of finance legislation without a vote in Parliament. He just kind of skipped over everyone and said, I'm just going to do what I need to do. And that ticked everyone off. Well, not quite everyone. Macron's closest allies were still in his camp, but the left and the right joined forces to say, this government cannot stand.
That's really at the core of the issue, this power play, this political power play, this depolarization of not only of the French society, but in particular in the French parliament. And this power play leads to great uncertainty for the economy.
All of this leaves Emmanuel Macron with a very difficult next move. He can't call an election because the Constitution forbids him from doing so, having just called one in July. Next July, he can call an election. So that's a big gap, where France has no way of passing a budget to get its economy back on track.
Macron is clearly under pressure. The no confidence vote was primarily a no confidence vote against him. He has to come up with a new prime minister, with a new government. Constitutionally, that is his task to appoint a new government, and he should do so quickly.
If Macron doesn't choose someone that at least, has some sort of majority approval, well, then the MPs can just, again, organize a no confidence vote, and then we're back to square one.
This process of choosing a new PM, Macron says it will only take days, and he was pretty defiant of those suggesting he should resign.
Et enfin, le mandat que vous m'avez démocratiquement confié est un mandat de 5 ans. Et je l'exercerai pleinement jusqu'à son terme.
So, this is where we're at. France is on the clock. If it can't pass a budget by December 20th, emergency legislation would just roll over the 2024 budget into next year. But there's a consensus out there that you can't fix France's current-day problems with yesterday's solutions. And until they figure that out, we have Macron once again trying to pick up the shattered pieces of a failed election gamble and a French economy that is in really rough shape.
Vive la République, vive la France.